Hi everyone, Assalamu alaikum, and hello everyone. My name is Sana Salim. Um, I don't know if we want to take a couple minutes to let people um, log in, or we can go ahead and get started. But my name is Sana Salim. I'm the nonprofit department program manager and staff attorney here at MLFA. We're so happy to have you. For those of you who have joined, I'm excited for this series. We kind of tailored it to the mosque and kind of issues related to the mosque. So today is the first in a series of about four webinars gearing up for not only election season, but just again, things that are really vital and important to a successful operation and running of your mosque and masajid. So today's topic is election year in the mosques, what you need to know. We have our two amazing attorneys here who will go through kind of the do's and don'ts for what you can and cannot say, not only from the pulpit, but also from our pulpit, I say in quotes, and then also, in written material and things that your mosque leadership is also saying. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Christina Jump, who's our civil litigation department head, and Chelsea Glover, who is our civil litigation senior staff attorney, who will be starting off this presentation. I myself will join in at the end, and we'll leave about 10-15 minutes for questions at the end. I hope you guys are able to utilize the chat function. We really want this to be as interactive as possible, so please add any questions you have throughout the presentation in the chat, and we'll kind of answer them in the order that they are received. And with that, I will turn it over to Chelsea.
Hi, everyone. My name is Chelsea Glover. I'm the senior staff attorney at MLFA's Civil Litigation Department in our legal division. And I'm just going to get us started in some general information about how the IRS's tax code will apply to mosques and other religious organizations and what you can do to stay compliant. And can we switch to the next slide, please? So the IRS protections for religious organizations refer to two specific entities, and I'm going to use the term church in quotes, but for our purposes today, we're talking about mosques and masjids. We're talking about places of worship and places including their integrated auxiliaries. So if there's a school on the campus, that is included in the definition of a mosque. If it's a convention of mosques or religious communities, that is also covered under that term. And these entities are automatically tax exempt. So when the IRS is talking about churches, they're talking about mosques, they're talking about synagogues, any religious or place that's solely organized to a place of worship. And that entity will be automatically tax exempt. You don't need to apply for a tax exemption. You're just presumed to be tax exempt. The second group is called a religious organization. So it's a organization that is still organized to promote a religion, but it's not necessarily solely geared towards one religion. So that would be an Islamic organization that does not cover a mosque. Any kind of non-denominational ministry, any entity to study Islam or promote Islam, that would not be a mosque. That would be covered under the religious organization title. And these entities must apply for a tax exemption. It's not a presumption that you will be exempt. Right, next slide, please. Okay. So for both of these entities and all 501c3 entities to maintain their tax exemption, there are certain things they cannot do. And for our discussion today, we're going to talk about the political activity that you may not engage in. Otherwise, you could risk losing that tax exempt status. So the main rules are no lobbying and no political campaigning. So what's lobbying? Lobbying is trying to influence legislation. So you can think of, lobbying as an L, legislation is with an L. And then in contrast with political campaigning, which is about campaigning for a specific person to hold office. So if you think political campaigning has a P, a person has a P, you can associate it that way. And under the IRS code, a mosque or a religious organization cannot devote a substantial part of their activities towards lobbying or attempting to influence any kind of legislation. And I want to focus on the term substantial. That is a context-specific definition. It's going to depend on how much of time, resources, how much money is being spent on influencing legislation or calling to influence legislation. You can mosques are allowed to do a limited amount of lobbying, but they cannot devote an excessive amount of their resources towards lobbying. It's a gray area, so you have to be careful with that. But just know that you can. There's a little bit you can do, but you cannot toe the line in towards substantial. Counterpoint: political campaigning is an absolute prohibition. You're not allowed to campaign on behalf of any candidate for public office or even intervene in that political campaign. So we're going to go into the specific activities of what you can do, but know that you're not allowed to do even a little bit of political campaigning. Any political campaigning at all will risk that tax exempt status. Next slide, please. Okay, so with lobbying, what is prohibited? Lobbying refers to contacting or encouraging the congregation to contact people in the legislature to advance or support or oppose a specific piece of legislation. So, if say every Friday you are, especially in the if it's in the election season and you are or you're looking at different legislative enactments that are proposed and you're saying, guys, we need to call our representative and tell them to vote on XYZ, that would be lobbying. And if that's something you're doing consistently, continuously, that could be a substantial part of your expenditures, which would take you out of that tax exemption. Similarly, advocating for adoption or rejection of legislation also is included in that definition. And of course, you're allowed to have issues that you care about, and you can encourage people to vote, as we will discuss later. However, to specify specific pieces of legislation that you are trying to adopt or reject, and making that a focal point of your sermon or your service or any of your religious activities could run you afoul of that prohibition on lobbying. Next slide, please. So, mosques may involve themselves in issues of public policy without being lobbying. So you can talk about specific issues that are important to the community. You can educate them on that issue without necessarily tying it to a specific piece of legislation. You can distribute materials you can even distribute materials on the legislation while not necessarily encouraging your community to take any position on whatsoever, to reach out to anyone or anything, but just to educate people on what the actual state of the law is. And of course, talking about public policy in a just neutral educational manner. So the difference is between discussing an issue and then advocating for that issue by contacting the government. That's kind of the line we're walking. Next slide, please. Okay, now to political campaigning, which again, as I recall, this is the absolute prohibition one. And this is something that you will have seen a lot of other religious churches and organizations, and sometimes mosques and synagogues have run afoul of this because it is pretty broad. Political campaigning is contributing to a campaign with finance, with money, or making statements in support of that campaign, making statements opposed to a specific candidate or public office, and even some neutral activities. If, say, you are favoring one party or one candidate over another in your voter education or voter registration activities, or your public policy, education activities, if you're only talking about one candidate or one political party's issues and not the other, that could have the effect of favoring a candidate or a group of candidates over the other. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so what is permitted? Frankly, just being nonpartisan. If you are going to get involved in politics, you can't favor one side or over the other. So if you're going to, for example, give a forum to candidates, you need to have it open to all candidates, regardless of which position they take. If you're giving voter education guides, you need to cover the full slate of candidates, not just, say, the Democrats or the Republicans or the Greens or anything like that. Voter registration drives can't be for certain parties. They can't be limited to. You can't say, "Oh, you're planning to vote this way. Don't come to the voter registration drive." That's not allowed. And any kind of get out the vote drives encourage everyone to vote equally. Voter registration, just as long as it's neutral, as long as it's not designed to push for one party over. Next slide, please. So what about our free expression rights? First Amendment allows people to advocate for political positions, and that's true. However, what the IRS and what courts have held is that the IRS is giving churches, mosques, religious organizations a benefit by not requiring them to pay taxes. And to get that benefit, they have to um, remain politically neutral. Otherwise, they have to pay taxes just like everyone else who gets to advocate for politics, right? So, as individuals, we all still retain our free speech rights. And so, if you're a leader of a mosque or leader of a religious organization, you can still express your views, but only speaking for yourself and as an individual. Now, you'll sometimes see people will make statements, during service at an official function, and then say, "Oh, in my individual capacity, I support this. I support this candidate. I support this piece of legislation," and then proceed to go back onto official religious services. That's not allowed. That disclaimer does not change the setting in which you've given the presentation. It doesn't change the official nature of the communication. And so that makes it a mosque's communication on behalf of the mosque, and therefore they will be liable. They would have broken they would have risked that tax exemption by participating in a political campaign. Similarly, if you're going to speak or write separately, if you're going to make any written statement, it can't be in the official publication. The official mosque publication needs to be somewhere separate, and it needs to clearly state that these comments are personal and do not represent the views of the organization to protect the mosque's tax exemption. Next slide, please. Okay. So what's the difference between issue advocacy and political campaigning? And how can issue advocacy sometimes look like political campaigning? This typically happens when there's an issue that distinguishes a candidate from the other, such that to say, I support this issue means I support this candidate. This tends to happen, for example, when it comes to advocating for pro-life positions. Sometimes just advocating for a pro-life position inherently implies a specific candidate over another. So never tell an audience to vote, obviously, specifically for or against a candidate. But if you tell someone to vote for or against a specific position and only one candidate is holding that position, that can look like it's a candidate endorsement, especially the closer it is to election day. And a statement it don't have to even refer just to the candidate's name. You can have a picture of the candidate. You can, again, refer to that party affiliation, and you can refer to specific distinctive issues they have. Typically, the closer you are to an election, the more it looks like political campaigning. I've read reports of right before early voting starts, we'll have one candidate speak and just say nice things about them, but then have no other candidates speak during the duration of the campaign. And so that looks like political advocacy. That looks like you're participating in that candidate's campaign to the exclusion of everyone else's. And that runs you afoul of the tax exemption. Next slide, please. Sorry, next slide. Oh, gotta go back a little bit. There we go. Okay, now I'm going to pass it to Christina Jump, our department head.
Thanks so much, Chelsea. And I want to take just a minute to be super annoying to my colleagues here and go ahead and tout their credentials a little bit more since they skipped over that themselves. I do want to point out that we're very thrilled to have Sana Salim as the manager of our nonprofit department. So she does manage that program and leads all of that, which has been absolutely outstanding. We're so thrilled to have her in this role and her knowledge and expertise working on this and coordinating even with other attorneys nationwide to help us be able to have as wide a reach as we can, to advise as many clients as we can and as many nonprofit groups. Sana received her degree from the University of Denver. She has practiced in civil litigation, although she keeps that a little bit quiet around the office. And she also has been involved in civil litigation clinics. She was on the Denver University Law Review. And she has done just a substantial amount of work in equal rights and in with the Lilly School of Philanthropy, as well as now directly with us in the area of nonprofit compliance. So we're very happy to have her. Chelsea and I, along with the rest of our colleagues, turn to her often for advice in exactly this area when the issues come up. And so we do look to her for our recommendations there and how to help us guide and recommend the right course of action for our clients if they are nonprofit agencies, which is outstanding. And then I know Chelsea well because she practices full time in civil litigation, which is wonderful. And we are so thrilled to have her. Chelsea's been practicing as an attorney since 2015. She went to undergraduate at a certain school in Boston that's really well regarded. And then she got both her law degree and her LLM from Duke University and has held many different positions. She's published articles regarding diversity within the legal profession and has been an invaluable part of our team within civil litigation since we've been here. So just wanted you all to know that they know of what they speak. And so we are really happy to have both of them here to be able to present. So now I'm going to step in after that and go through building on what Chelsea just discussed. What are some tips for if you do want to have candidates come speak at the mosque? So Chelsea just told you some things you can do, some things you cannot do. Let's talk about how you would apply that in a practical way. So tips for allowing any candidates to come speak to the mosque is first of all to give equal opportunity to opposing candidates to both come speak, or three, or however many there may be in a given race. If you are only inviting one candidate, then that's very likely to get you in trouble, get you scrutinized much more closely. If you instead are making it open as a political forum, as a Q&A for the community, something along those lines, that will work much better, and that'll keep you a lot safer, a lot cleaner. So avoid offering support or opposition of any one candidate. We do recommend as a team that you express neutrality if you are going to host candidates for any political offices, and make a point of saying we are not endorsing or taking the side here whatsoever. You're presenting an opportunity, you're presenting a forum if you have candidates come. Do not sponsor political fundraising. If you do that, that's going to be that's going to be a large problem because you are very clearly not only favoring one, but actually trying to boost one particular campaign. So we don't recommend doing that. Instead, you can invite speakers if it is listed or noted as a forum of those who have been invited. You can invite as long as you invite across the board. You invite all of the candidates for that office, but don't invite speakers to come speak to you simply because you're inviting the Democratic candidate or the Republican candidate, and you want to offer and advertise that you're having that particular one candidate come speak at one of your events. That's really not a good way to advertise it. Now, what may happen, and what we do get questions on occasion, is that a member of your congregation, a member of your mosque or of the masjid, of the local community may be running for office. And you have that individual also on your board or who holds a position of authority within your organization. And so obviously you're going to have that person doing things because they normally would even if they weren't running for office. And that's okay. If that happens, just make sure that you're not introducing them as, and is also a candidate for, is also running for office. Because once you start doing that, then you're endorsing the political campaign, or it could be seen that way. Make sure if you have somebody in that situation of a bit of a dual capacity, or somebody who already has a capacity with your organization who is now also a candidate for office, that you make clear, not by saying they're not here in their capacity as a candidate for this office, but that you make it clear that they are here in their capacity as a member of our board of directors, here in the capacity as our community outreach individual, or whatever the role is that they do have. That would work really well. And then so you want to, again, just make sure that in advanced communications that you send out, if you're sending out flyers, if you're posting on Instagram or Facebook, if you still use that, which is absolutely fine, then you want to make sure that you don't advertise that person's, again, role as a candidate unless you're advertising for both. Now, what may happen is that you invite everybody. I'm saying both because typically we have a two-party system. But if you have multiple candidates and you've invited them all and only one shows, if you know this in advance, I would still caution you about having just one. But if you're still advertising it as a forum and we have invited all of these, and you're keeping the door open up until that last possible minute, you're not at any point advertising, we'll be featuring only this one person because only this one agreed to come. You can do things like, list this one is, speaker confirmed. And we hope to get input from these remaining candidates who have been invited as well. That would be all right. But again, make sure that when you're doing it, that you either don't announce the office if it's not a community forum, political forum where you've invited equally, or if you invite equally, that you make that equally clear, not bigger font for one and smaller font for another or anything like that. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so when you do invite them to speak, let's say you're having a public forum, you've decided to go that route, you can then state that these are candidates for whatever the local office is, for a state representative or whatever it may be, and that you have invited all of them to speak as a public forum. Have the questions prepared in advance. Please do not wing it. That's not going to go well, because you want to have an opportunity to prepare the questions, reread the questions, have at least one or two other people read over them, and in an ideal world, you would have an independent, nonpartisan person review it, or bipartisan. If you can't find nonpartisan, that's a little bit tough to find. You can find bipartisan and have bipartisan individuals review the questions. Another way around that, if you're thinking, how can I possibly get someone to do that? We've invited people and they're just not doing it. Then look toward the official government issues pages, or voter guides that are put out by nonpartisan entities, and they will list set questions that they raise to candidates, and you can choose from among those. And typically those, you can look at the structure of those questions too, because those are typically done and phrased in such a way that they are neutral. Even if one candidate is clearly going to be likely to speak much more to a particular question than another, they are phrased neutrally, they are presented neutrally. And so that's the structure of questions to follow, and you can follow that type of question. We do recommend, again, also not having only one person doing it in advance, absolutely. Making sure that you have multiple review levels, and as much as you can, having it be a nonpartisan or a bipartisan review, and at the very least, tracking that language that you're getting from official nonpartisan websites, nonpartisan entities that just promote voters' rights. Generally, those are good ones to look at. Make sure that you're giving each candidate an equal opportunity to speak, not where one speaks, runs over time, and then you've run out of time for the other one to have much, or they only get 5 minutes. That's not going to go well. But where you're giving them each an opportunity to speak, and back and forth is better, again, so that it doesn't appear to be heavily favoring one versus another. Back and forth where each presents on an issue. Maybe you only ask this question to this one, and then you ask this question, a different question to the other one, and then you come back, and then you give them each an opportunity to respond to anything else that they heard. You can do that. If there's an opportunity for that to happen, that's all right as well. But you have to give them equal time to respond on the issues. We also do not recommend that you ask candidates to agree or disagree with certain positions, agendas, platforms, or statements that the mosque has. So, for example, saying, where do you stand on religious freedom? Where do you stand on a particular initiative that may have been proposed locally or come up locally? You can ask where they stand on it and just see what they say, but saying, would you agree right here, right now, to commit to a position on this issue? Would you agree right here, right now, to support this particular bill, or to support our application for additional zoning, something like that, even if it directly affects your organization? Doing that takes you out of the neutral public forum context. Then finally, for this slide, we want to point out that don't allow the person in the role as the moderator to comment on questions or comment on answers, or to imply that they approve or disapprove of any of the answers that have been given or of any of the candidates themselves. So something like this one's a great person. I've known him forever. One of my best friends. I can personally attest that he's a very good-hearted individual. And then we also have that's not neutral, and that's not. And we're surprised yet happy that this person showed up. That's not going to get you what you need in order to stay in good standing as a nonprofit, as with your 501c3 status. Choose your moderator wisely. That's really key for making sure that all of these rules are followed. This is not necessarily your best public speaker that you're going to choose as your moderator. In fact, it's probably not your best public speaker, because this person's role is not going to be the public speaking. This is going to be the person who can keep peace at a meeting when the meetings get really feisty. That's the person that you want to have as a moderator. And the person that you want to have as the moderator is somebody who can simply present the questions, be sure to go back and forth, keep track on the time, keep track with the timer, and make sure that they stick to the time frames that you've provided. And that if one person runs over, then you make sure that the other person has that additional time as well. Don't hold the second person to 5 minutes if the other person talked for 10. So those are important things when you're selecting who your moderator will be. Again, this is not just the top person with the most authority, the position with the most authority within your organization, and it's not your best speaker. It's probably not your fundraiser. And it would be even better if it definitely was not your fundraiser. Because then you're drawing a little bit more of a distinction between this event versus the other events where you do fundraise. We could have the next slide, please. I think we'll be switching in just a minute here to the next slide. While we're waiting for that to click, there we go. We're talking about some business activities here then. What kinds of business activities can you do that are good? What kind can you not do? What kind would be seen as overly supporting? So, for example, if you have a candidate running their campaign out of one of your offices, that's going to present a problem, because you're providing them that benefit, even if they're paying for it. You're providing them that benefit where maybe you don't offer that kind of space to others. You haven't offered that kind of space to opponents. So leasing an office, leasing event space where you would not make that equally available, or where you do not make that space already equally available to members of the public, is something that we don't recommend that you do. If you just provide a mailing list to the candidate that seems most aligned with your viewpoints and you want to help them, and they seem to have the community's best interests in mind, so let's just give them our mailing list. Well, you have to give that equally to everyone if you give it to anyone, or at least offer to make it available. So we don't recommend that you do that. Accepting any paid advertising may constitute participating in the political campaign unless you accept it from all. Now, maybe you're not getting offers from all, and that is possible, but the more levels in defending yourself and defending the organization's actions that you have to go down, the trickier it becomes and the more difficult it becomes. So you want to try really hard not to do that. So in order to maintain and to remain safely tax exempt, try to offer the good or the service or the facility or the space to the general public. That's a good thing. If you do that just broadly, it's always available for anybody to rent, and has been for years, or has been for a long time. You offer that good or service or facility or space to equally offer it to political candidates. Maybe make a statement, or you have gone to each office, each campaign headquarters, to say, this is a space that is available should you wish to utilize our facilities. Charge customary and usual fees for that usage. If you normally charge, then charge your normal rate. Don't give one a discount. And if you're only getting one, if you would have given a discount to all candidates running for that, but only one is utilizing your space, then don't give that one a discount because you hypothetically would have given it to the other individual as well. Charge them your normal rate if there's only one. And be ready to show in writing, preferably with a written letter transmitted or an email as a follow-up. We offered I'm following up on our offer in person today when our staff came to your headquarters to offer our space for any campaign event should you wish to rent it at here's our rates, that sort of thing. If you have that, you have separate emails showing that you offered that to everyone, that's best. And again, if only one candidate takes you up on that, charge them the normal standard rate. Don't do a discount. And don't conduct special activities specifically for that one candidate. Again, if you offer a full public forum and the others just don't show, make sure that you keep that door open all the way up until the last minute that you are conducting that event for them to walk in. And maybe then they're not going to have equal time if they didn't show up at the designated start time, and you're sure that you let them know about it. But make sure that you are giving equal opportunity, at least in advance, for those other candidates to show, to participate in your advertising. We have confirmation from this. We have invited all of these. We are pending confirmation on these others, but we hope to see everyone there, and we would like to hear from all candidates equally. Statements like that go a long way and help you out quite a bit and put you just in a much more comfortable zone for making sure that you're not engaging in any political activity that would get you in trouble. And if we could go to the next slide. Okay. So this goes to everything that we said for what you speak, for what you say, and for what you send out in advance. Also goes for what's on your website. Posting something on the website, the organization's website, that endorses a political candidate is outright not wise, not a good idea. That's going to get you in trouble. And once it's on the internet, it's always on the internet. There are things like the Wayback Machine. There'll be a cached page. There'll be things where somebody took a screenshot of it and it's going to be findable. So try not to do that ever, that you're not endorsing a political candidate if you are a 501c3. If you say, oh, this person announced their candidacy for office, we're so glad to see a member of the community running we'd love to see this kind of representation. Don't do that on the website. And again, I wouldn't do that, again, not on the website, not in person, not on your Facebook page. If individual members want to do that on their own individual pages, then that's all right for them to do. But if you've got someone in a position of authority who is using any form of social media that lists what their role, what that position of authority within your organization is, for example, this comes up the most with LinkedIn. People on LinkedIn saying I'm doing this in my personal capacity, LinkedIn's not the place for doing anything in your personal capacity. LinkedIn is a professional networking type of social media. So it's a professional networking platform. So wouldn't recommend doing that. It's going to appear, because it will appear with the organization's name, as if the organization is endorsing the particular candidate, even if you don't mean that. Having flyers available on behalf of one candidate but not others is a problem, is something that can get you into trouble. And then mosques and other organizations are also responsible for establishing and maintaining links to other websites. So if you have links to other websites, if you say something like, go ahead and look at this candidate's website, you can find more information here. Look at this candidate's website, you can find more information here. And if you link to them, even if you're linking to all of them for the candidates for a given office, be aware that by posting that link on your own website, you become potentially responsible for any offensive content that is on that page. So if you've linked to it, you are potentially responsible for the content. It doesn't mean that you necessarily endorse it, especially if you're listing all of those. And I would have big disclaimers on that if you're advertising for a public forum. And again, now political forum, that's not the right phrasing. You want to use public forum of candidates would be the best way to use that, the best language to use. But making sure to state the information provided here is not our own. The information reflected on each candidate's campaign website reflects their views and not ours. We're not endorsing one way or the other. So in order to remain more safely tax exempt, again, you want to think neutrally. You want to think that you are presenting the information neutrally. You're just setting it out there. You're not pushing one versus the other. You're just placing them both, placing multiple plates on the table, and that's it. And no preferential seating, none that, one's way down at the end and one's over there. You're just setting the information out there for people to choose, to make their own judgments on. If you post a voter guide, make sure that it is, in fact, a neutral voter guide and not a heavily slanted voter guide. Again, I would recommend that you maybe use. Sometimes you'll see local newspapers will have one; those may not be neutral. But if there is a nonprofit, like a Get Out the Vote kind of thing, or from your county, from your city's website that just says these are the candidates and here are the questions and the answers, you can link to that. But be aware of monitoring the linked content and that it can change. So if you do link to any content for any political candidates, understand that they can update those pages, which may not change the link, but you got to make sure that you're checking periodically, whether it's once a week. Once a week would be, I think, ideal in a political campaign, to see what they're looking at, what else they've added to the page. Maybe it looked fine and neutral and okay originally, but now there's something offensive on there that showed up, and now you're responsible for it. And nobody's checked on your end what it is for 2-3 weeks, and so it's been up there with a link on your organization's page for 2 to 3 weeks to something that's super offensive. That could potentially get you in trouble. So be aware of that. If you are going to post links, again, post them for all candidates and make sure that you're monitoring the content that is on those third-party websites. So if we could go to the next page, please. And now I am going to turn it back to our awesome nonprofit department chair and turn it back over to Sana Salim to take it from here.
So we're going to kind of end this portion of the presentation talking about the consequences. Obviously, Chelsea hit on, kind of the beginning, religious, what's the definition, and kind of outlining that for you. And Christy talked about a lot of how to apply it, right? How these things play out in real life with your mosque and with your imams and things like that. So what if after those beautiful explanations, someone in your mosque is still engages in what we've defined as political activity? So first thing, obviously, is that your mosque can jeopardize its tax exempt status under C3, which we forgot to see there. But so even if mosques are not required to get C3 status, as Chelsea mentioned earlier, but all the 5 regulations still apply. And so they can lose all those benefits that C3 status affords them, which affects things like eligibility to receive tax deductible contributions from your donors. Further, a mosque can be subject to what's called an excise tax on the political expenditure. So the IRS may come in and say, okay, give us a list of how much money your mosque has spent, whether it's money that was going towards the website, money that, and on publications or pamphlets or not political, but public forums that you've spent money on any of that. A mosque can be subject to a 2.5 tax rate, can be imposed even against the managers or the mosque leaders who agreed to those expenditures, knowing that they were political expenditures. There's also a rate of 10%. The mosque can be charged 10% of that political expenditure. So keep that in mind. Things that, so there's a lot that mosques do, churches do. There's all kinds of articles about, churches, mosques, synagogues violating some of these things. And the IRS has been, and I'm sure Chelsea can chime in, less than consistent on applying some of these consequences. And I say that not to take you off your guard, because as Muslim, organizations, I do feel like we have an extra lens on us and our organizations. So just take that for what it is. And even if the IRS isn't like knocking down the doors of churches and synagogues left and right, it's just, there's always a risk, an extra risk, I feel, with Muslim organizations. I wanted to put that out there. but this is what we have to be aware of, and these are the potential consequences. So the IRS will sometimes give the mosque or the religious organization an opportunity to correct the violation. You either recover the expenditure, which for all practical purposes, sometimes how do you do that if it's already been spent? And then they may also give you the opportunity to establish safeguards to prevent it from happening again in the future. They'll give you potentially an opportunity where they might impose that tax and then give you a certain amount of time in which to, pay it. If the expenditures are not corrected, or if the remedies are, if you haven't done what they've asked you to do, then an additional tax equal to 100% of the expenditures might be imposed against the organization. So there are certain levels. It seems to be more on kind of a not a sliding scale, but they'll give you certain opportunities and avenues to correct yourself as a mosque. And if those things are not done, and if they're not corrected within a certain allocated time, then you just pay a tax that's equal to 100% of all of those expenditures. Next slide, please. So again, these are just kind of bullet points of more possible consequences. So everything from, we've already touched on the mosques, C3 status could be revoked, and that would in effect have the consequence of the mosque's net income would now be subject to federal and state income tax where applicable. We've talked about no charitable deduction for donors now. So again, donors might very well still donate, but they wouldn't be able to claim that charitable deduction on their, tax returns. If it's applicable, if your mosque has, additional properties, there could be a possible loss of the property tax exemption under state law, a possible loss of the sales tax exemption. So as you know, your mosque, if you're buying supplies and office supplies and things like that, you have that sales tax exemption. That could be revoked. You have a possibility of loss of unemployment tax under state federal law. I know mosques get benefits for mailing. They get special mailing rates through USPS. You would probably lose that. An imam, if your imam has a special housing allowance, that could also be affected. These are all, I'm not saying all of these things would happen. These are all just things that could possibly happen if your mosque does engage in political activity. And then the last one on here is that the exemption of, again, we use church and mosque interchangeably, but the exemption of the church from the ban on religious discrimination under various federal state laws. I know Chelsea touched on the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, RFRA, so that's something that we can talk about more in the questions as well. But those are all things that could be affected. Again, from a practical standpoint, I haven't come across too many recent cases where the IRS has gone after mosques. I think also part of that is we are being extra cautious. But in an election season, we can never be too cautious. It's hard to script our daily lives, and it's hard to script the lives of leaders, imams, people who potentially have a microphone, or if the mosque has, written blogs or websites, things like that. It's hard to script all of that, but you can provide these tools to your leadership just to reemphasize things that they may or may not already know, but you can never, it never hurts to emphasize it, especially in an election year, especially in a contested and kind of heated election year like we are, we have coming up. So we just want to give you all the tools to really succeed, help your mosque succeed, and hopefully you'll still be able to promote the issues. I know Chelsea and Christy have touched on that. We can all, mosques are definitely allowed to touch on the issues that are important to them, whether, whatever that may be. But when it comes to specific candidates, we just need to be very mindful of, what we're putting out there as a mosque. Again, in an individual capacity, they've, Christy and Chelsea have touched on that, how that's different. But as a mosque, just to be very mindful of what is coming out and kind of what a reasonable person would think that, okay, is this the mosque, endorsing it, or are we, is that in particular individual within the mosque who's endorsing it? So you never want to have a reasonable person have that question in mind. So with that, I'd like to go forward. I'm going to give you guys, I know I'm not able to see or hear our audience, but please use our chat function. And I've created a pop quiz for lack of a better word for this, but I think it'll be fun. I know how hard it is to, like Christy said, sometimes apply some of the rules that we've talked about. So if we can go to the next slide, I'll kind of show you what we're going to do. So prohibited or permitted, P or P is what we're going to call this game. And if you guys just want to type into the chat. So the first question I have is, a mosque makes contributions to a candidate's campaign fund. Is that prohibited or permitted? Drop your comment in the chat. We'll give you 20 seconds and then we'll move on to the answer. Anyone? Okay. We can go on to the next slide and get the answer. It is prohibited. Obviously, that's kind of the softball that I started off with. A mosque obviously cannot make contributions to a candidate's campaign fund or host any type of fundraiser for any candidate. So we'll go to the next slide. Question number 2. A mosque makes public statements of position, verbal and written, in favor of or in opposition to candidates for office through official mosque publications, at official mosque functions, or both. Is that prohibited or permitted? Type into the chat. I'm so sorry I missed your answer in the previous question. We'll give you more time. Okay, we got a couple answers on this one, so we can go forward. That you are correct, prohibited. And that's pretty self-explanatory, so we can probably just move to the next one. Question 3. A mosque imam delivers a khutbah series addressing what the Quran says about abortion, criminal justice reform, sexual orientation, and gender identity, and other topics with social and spiritual implications. Is this prohibited or permitted? Type your answer into the chat. Okay, so we've got our same 2 awesome audience members who are participating, and they answered permitted. Let's see if, oh, we got another one. So this one was permitted. And so that goes back to, imams talking about social issues, totally fine. The religious perspective of those social issues, totally fine, because it's not going to a particular candidate who's running for office or anything like that. So social issues are fine during the khutbah. It's when an imam goes and says something like, vote for candidate X or don't vote for candidate Y, things like that create the problem. I think we just have maybe one more, so we'll go to the next slide. A mosque website links to third-party websites containing materials supporting or opposing candidates. Is that prohibited or permitted? Type your answer into the chat. Okay. We have a couple answers on that one now too. And let's see what the answer is. Next slide. That is prohibited. You guys were right. All of what Christy had just said about websites and just being really careful with who monitors the websites, what you're linking to. So, this goes to show that it doesn't even have to be something that someone within the mosque has written on your own website, you have to be very cognizant of what you're linking to from your website and where that directs to, and just keep that in mind for whoever is your website person or contributor to the website. And then I guess we have one more, and we'll do that. Yep. Question 5. A mosque owns space suitable for events and makes it available for rent to the public on a first-come, first-served basis. A candidate pays the standard fee to host a campaign dinner. Is that prohibited or permitted? When you say that too many times, you get all jumbled. Prohibited or permitted? Type into the chat. Okay. We've got a couple answers for that one. So let's see. Are you guys right? Permitted. Yes. I believe Christy talked about that one as well, too, is renting out space for candidates. I know here at my local mosque, we do that as well. I've attended some fundraisers there myself, so that is permitted. It's an open space. Anyone can rent it. They advertise it as an open space to be rented by the general public. So with that, we will kind of address the questions that have come into the comment section here. And I believe, how are we doing this? Let's see. Sorry, I'm just going through my chat to see what the first question was. So the first question was, is it okay to condemn alleged genocide being committed by a foreign government? And Christy, can you answer that one?
Yes, I can answer that one. So what we recommend on that is that certainly much with, as we discussed, that you can communicate positions on issues, but not candidates. Then you are able to communicate positions on things that are happening. Again, you can communicate the position on particular activities or compliance with laws. What we do recommend is that it not read so much as we are against X, coming from a 501c3 organization. There are other places and other times absolutely for that type of a statement, but coming from a 501c3 organization, it would make much more sense and be a much better approach to respond that instead, what you're going to say is, we respect the ruling of the International Court. We are reporting neutrally and accurately that the International Court made X ruling on this particular date or is investigating. We support the work of the International Court. We support compliance with all international laws. And stating that you support the compliance with international law and that all be held equally accountable for international laws and for adherence to them is absolutely fine. Again, the place to say a particular country is taking a particular action, which is wrong because is not through your 501c3. The place to do that is through your 501c4, through a political action committee, through other organizations like that.
Okay, great answer. Thank you so much. Our next question is it okay to identify politicians who are for or against the alleged genocide from the pulpit, if you will?
And I'll take that one. This kind of ties on to what Christy said, but in the short answer is this would be run you into afoul of that political campaign prohibition, for example, especially if you're at the pulpit and in light of the policy position. So if you, for example, say, we condemn genocide, and here are all the politicians, and these are their positions on genocide, that is, even though you're not saying vote yes or no, you are saying vote yes or no, because you've just told your congregation what you believe in, and here are the politicians who don't believe in that. That is political campaigning. So, like Christy said, the pulpit is not necessarily the place to do that. Also, you can trust your congregates. You can present the candidates and all the issues they have, and they're going to make the decision for themselves. They're not, you know, your congregates, you know what their belief systems are. They can identify for themselves who the candidates are that support those beliefs. You don't have to be the one to do that. And you shouldn't have to, you don't need to risk your tax exempt status to do that.
Right. That's really important to know. I mean, it's an issue that is really important to our community and to the Muslim community right now, is that, well, can we talk about genocide? Can we do these things? And, you know, just being really careful about who is the one talking about it from within the mosque and how are they communicating that information. And maybe using their personal social media would be a better venue for them than the mosque, mosque one. So third question, if all candidates confirmed they are not attending except for the one community member who is running, can the mosque still hold the event? And I know Christy touched on this directly. So, as long as the invitation was for everyone, as long as the invitation, and let's specify too, is that the invitation must go to every candidate running for that same position and that same office. I know we mentioned this earlier, but I just wanted to clarify that that's the standard, is that invitation has to be given to everyone running for that office, not 10 other offices, but that specific office.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, the mosque can still hold the event in that case. And so I had one more that was relating to RFRA. We have a couple minutes left. So the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. Chelsea, if you wouldn't mind one more time kind of going over, I know a lot of times mosque churches can use that argument kind of in defense, saying, well, we have First Amendment rights, we should be able to say what we want to say. And what kind of can you talk us through what the IRS says about that, or what the courts have held about that?
Yep, no problem. As the courts have held that how RFRA and the First Amendment relate to churches is if some government regulation would have to substantially burden that religious exercise. And courts have held over and over again that unless your religion says that we don't pay taxes to the government, it doesn't violate your religion to make you pay taxes to the government under the government's rules. And so the government and the courts have followed this, that the government is providing you a benefit, a relief from tax burden if you do XYZ. And if you want to contribute in politics, then you have to pay the same taxes that everyone else who wants to contribute in politics has to do. And that is how they've carved that out. That one, it's not burdening your religious exercise, because your religious exercise you're not advocating, oh, my religion says I can't pay taxes. You're saying I have the right to say what I want to say. And those are two different things. You can say what you want to say and still pay taxes, as most Americans do. So that would be how they thread that needle.
Sure. I think
we have one question just came up in the chat. Elaborating on the last pop quiz scenario, if a candidate wants to hold an event at a mosque, should the mosque leaders reach out to an opposing candidate to ask if they want to host an event too?
Yes. Yes, you should. I would, and I would hesitate at even having that event at the mosque. If it's not something that you've previously done, the mosque has not previously hosted public events, has not previously hosted candidate events, or doesn't widely, like in one of Sana's hypotheticals, doesn't widely make the space available to the general public on a first come first served basis. We hesitate to start doing that during a campaign season. But if you are going to say yes, then absolutely make it available to other candidates for that same position as well. Like Sana said, this doesn't mean like every single person running for any office, but across the board for, where you're going to be choosing on the ballot line between this person and whoever their opposition is, make sure that everybody on that ballot for that particular position, for that particular role or office, is given the same opportunity. And I would recommend that you do that by way of sending an email, to the headquarters, perhaps even calling or going over, stating that the space is available and here's your set standard rate to do so. Don't do it for free. Don't do it for a community member discount. And even if you do typically give a discount to members of your organization, I would not give that discount for the context of doing it as a political event, even if the candidate is a member of your organization. Take the discount away right there, because across the board for political, you want to make sure that it is all even.
Great answer. So just to wrap it up, we have more events, more webinars in this series. Please log into or go to mlfa.org and our events page. I believe it'll be in the chat here in a minute. We have more. So we have Christy and Chelsea joining us also on a couple more of these kind of worker classifications, employee, volunteer, independent contractor. Those are all very important issues when it comes to mosques, and how you guys are handling those classifications and what you're doing with regard to those roles and responsibilities. And we also have a really great one scheduled for kind of what your handbook and policies and what those things look like. So please do visit the website and log in. We have basically one a month for the next few months, and we'll have one immigration related one in November to kind of round out this series. Thank you guys for joining us, and please do register for any future webinars, and inshallah we will, Muslim Legal Fund of America is here. Please contact us with any questions you may have. We're happy to help with whatever we can. Thanks again. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.